Hello, welcome. Thank you to Dr. Street for joining us today and presenting his webinar on teaching writing well in digital settings.
All right, well, thank you, Cynthia, and thanks for everybody who's with us today. I think if I am remembering correctly, we have folks from upper elementary through high school, and I can share with you that now that I'm a professor of secondary education at Cal State Fullerton, and I've been there almost 20 years now. I did teach elementary school. I also taught middle school. I taught high school, and I taught two-year college, and now I'm at a four-year university. So I pretty much taught writing upper elementary through doctoral students at the PhD level. So I've been trying to figure out how to teach writing well for a long, long time. That was really the focus of my dissertation. So hopefully some of what I share today will be helpful. If you haven't already noticed, or if you joined us late, you may not have seen it. The link to the slide deck I'm using is a link in the chat. So I'm not able to see the chat as I'm presenting, but if it's not there, maybe Cynthia can repost it if somebody joined late and didn't have access to the earlier contributions from the chat. But that will get you to this slide deck, which is, of course, feel free to use any portions of it that might help you. So we're going to talk about how to teach writing well in digital settings. And I will say probably 80% of this is focused on just best practices in the teaching of writing. So a lot of very practical research-based tips and strategies and resources that should help you as a teacher of writing, regardless of what level of writing, what level of student you've got. I think a lot of this will be really helpful. Okay, so I'm not going to take the time to share this video with you, but I'll just tell you about it. This links to it. And I would recommend that on your own, you click through and listen and watch this really heartwarming video called Austin's Butterfly. In essence, what it is a bunch of first grade kids, and they are figuring out how, with feedback, a student who is trying to develop a picture of a butterfly really goes from really a very basic entry-level first draft to a stunning fifth or sixth draft version of this picture of a butterfly. So it's all about how, when we give specific intentional feedback that's positive, it can make all the difference in the world. And that's the one lesson I want everybody to take away from this, is that the feedback we give to our students is what will determine how well they write. So this is just a really nice video that highlights the importance of feedback being positive and how dramatic a change can happen when you give kids an opportunity to revise their work with your feedback to make it better. So have you ever, and I know I have, wondered if all the feedback you provide on student writing really makes a difference? I know I think about that a lot because I teach writing. I'm teaching a writing course this summer, and it takes a long time to give quality feedback. So I know for a fact I have spent more time giving feedback on some papers than the student took to write it. And it can be frustrating. So that's one of the opening questions I want to share with you is, does all the time we invest in student writing make a difference? This is a live link to a free resource called Informing Writing, The Benefits of Formative Assessment. It's written by Steve Graham and his associates, and they've put out a whole bunch of different reports on writing. What he's all about is going into the research and figuring out, based on the research, what can we learn about the teaching of writing. And specifically in this document, he's looking at the benefits of us giving students feedback. So here's the two questions he was asking. Does formative writing assessment enhance student writing? So does all the time we spend giving kids feedback on their writing make a difference? And then how can teachers improve the kind of formative writing assessment or feedback that we're giving? So in essence, to summarize that whole document for you, he found a really strong relationship in all the research between teacher feedback and improved student writing. Bottom line, our feedback really matters. Our kids can get they can become more fluent, meaning they could write more words more quickly without us as teachers to help them. But in order for them to improve the quality of their writing, they really need us. They really need us or other knowledgeable adults or even peers to help them improve. So he has some recommendations that come out in his report. And this is a Google Doc version of those recommendations. So I'm going to click on it just so we can go through a few of them and you can see what they look like. And just as you glance through these, just see if what kind of sense they make to you. Like this first one, provide feedback, is a no-brainer. Obviously, we need to be doing that. But he also looked at the research, and in terms of the kind of feedback that we're giving to our kids, they need our feedback, but they also need to learn how to assess their own writing. And we need to be monitoring students' writing progress. So if you've ever used a writing portfolio to monitor progress over time, that's one great way to do it. So you can see where students start at the beginning of the year and how they develop in a range of genres as writers. And then some of the best practices, this one kind of surprised me a little bit. Allow students to use the mode of writing in which they're most proficient. So if a student is most comfortable writing by hand, paper and pencil, then what they produce paper and pencil, using paper and pencil, will generally be better than if we ask them to word process. Or if a student is more comfortable word processing, what they produce tends to be better than if we ask them to then write with paper and pencil. So you might keep that in mind, especially now that everything is digital, that some students are still going to have a preference for paper and pencil over word processing. This is a hard one. I don't know how you can possibly minimize the extent to which the presentation forms such as handwriting legibility matters in terms of when we make judgments about quality, but he does mention that as for us to try and keep the legibility issues in the background and let the quality of the writing dictate what we have to say about their writing. And then a few suggestions in terms of how to read papers. Mask the writer's identity when scoring papers. If you've never done this, I would suggest you try it. I do it for some papers and it can make a difference. We tend to have certain images in our mind of our strongest writers and some of our poor writers. And if we come in and we look at the name first, it can definitely influence how we score that paper. Randomly order papers is a good idea, and then collecting multiple samples of student writing over time. So you may have found your head nodding a few times if you're already doing some of those things, or maybe there was something surprising, but this is, when he looked at the research, hundreds of studies, these are some of the recommendations that are all research-based that we as teachers of writing should keep in mind. So I really believe adopting a positive coaching stance can really, really help. Because when students see us as more experienced guides who are there to help them improve, they tend to be more willing to work hard for us. So the tone we take with students, it really does matter. It matters a lot. Oftentimes students are used to a lot of criticism of their writing. And if we can shift that and give them productive feedback, it can make a huge difference. So here's another one. This is my favorite quote from my favorite book on writing. Rewriting is the essence of writing well. It's where the game is won or lost. So this is something that students typically don't understand. They don't want to do it if they do understand it. But William Zinsser, who wrote this book, and it's been around forever now, it's been around for over 30 years. He died a couple of years ago, sadly, but his book on writing well, The Classic Guide to Writing Nonfiction, has really stood the test of time. And Zinsser is a writer, he's an editor, he's written books, he's written articles, and he's just a really thoughtful, funny writer who makes reading about writing in this book really funny and humorous and engaging. So if you've never seen this book before, this is one for us, not for our students, but you can see you can get it now for next to nothing, and it is a great book on how to write well. So if you're interested in learning more about the craft of writing, you'll get a lot out of this book. And his biggest point is probably We need to help students learn how to rewrite their work based on the feedback we give them, because that's really how they develop. And he says it's not just students. This is what the pros do. Professional writers rewrite. Oftentimes they spend more time rewriting than they do writing. So this is not extra homework. It's not punishment for students to rewrite. It's what real writers do. Here's another book that can help. It's called They Say, I Say. And if you don't have the book, you don't need it. I'm going to show you a workaround. But it's all about helping kids it's helping demystify academic writing for students. So if you were to Google the phrase "they say, I say" templates, you would find this as well as many others. So let me just show you what this is and talk about it in light of the book. All right, well, this link didn't want to open. Try one more time. Okay, well, I will fix that as soon as we get done, but I have a couple slides which really show you what these are all about. At the end of They Say, I Say, the appendix to this book are a series of writing templates or sentence frames that can be really helpful for student writers. And I've seen these used well upper elementary school through PhD programs. The They Say, I Say writing templates are everywhere. Every writing center, every college, university writing center I know of has a Google Doc version of the templates for students like this one. And they're really, really helpful. So it's a weird title, I know, They Say, I Say, but They Say is helping give students some sentence frames, some templates for helping them summarize what others are saying. So when they're reading, sometimes students need help with how to summarize or paraphrase what they're learning about. And that's the They Say part of the title. And then once the kids have a good understanding of what they're reading, then they're ready to enter this conversation. And there are a series of templates for helping kids with the I Say part of it. So giving kids some academic language on how to present their own arguments. So it really demystifies student writing or academic writing. It really shows kids the moves that matter in language that they can use, they can appropriate. So the reader-friendly templates are what make this possible. So just as an example, if you're trying to teach kids how to paraphrase something that they've read, these are some simple templates that are listed in that Google PDF or that Google Doc or at the back of the book in the appendices of this book. These are some simple templates for helping kids put together a sentence that paraphrases, because a lot of kids don't come to us with the academic language internalized that we might have on how to paraphrase, how to read something and put it into your own words. So these are a few simple ones. Just as another example from the book, you know, these templates, sometimes people think they're too simplistic or they're reductionistic or they take the thinking away from students. But Howard Gardner, who's a professor at Harvard, he asks his postdoctoral fellowship applicants to complete the following template. Most scholars in the field believe blank. As a result of my study, blank. So if you think about that, the kind of thinking that has to go into filling in those two blanks is pretty substantial. So the templates are really helpful for getting kids started with presenting themselves in a more academic tone. And I will, at the end, we'll have time at the end to talk. So I probably could find that link and fix it while on the fly while we're chatting at the end, because that link to templates is really helpful. You don't really need the book, they say, I say, you just need the templates at the end. So templates can help. Here's something else that can help. If we're asking kids to write in our classes, we need to make sure that they understand the writing task. So here's a simple task in green. I wouldn't say simple. Here's a sample task in green from a high school curriculum unit all about juvenile sentencing, juvenile justice. So just take a second to read that prompt, that writing task in green. And we'll think about it for a minute, and then I'll give you some tips for how you might help students to better understand what it is that we want them to do. So when I look at that prompt and I'm wondering, would my students be able to dissect that prompt and understand exactly what to do, or would they need help? And I would bet that most students would need some help on how to figure out what is it that this prompt wants us to do. So if you've never seen a do what chart before, this is something that can really help students with a dissecting a prompt and figuring out what the writing task is asking them to do. This link here is a link to a colleague of mine showing her students who are seniors in high school how to complete a do what chart, but I'll quickly show you here of what it's all about. So do what chart, here's how it works. You have, in that prompt we just looked at, you had a series of verbs. So the way the do what chart works, you as a class, and I would recommend doing the first couple yourselves as a class and model this for students. They won't be able to do this the first time on their own. But first, help students identify the verbs in the prompt. Write is the do. So the first verb is write. The second verb, when we look back at that task, is analyze, then indicate, then support, and then provide. So here are the 5 verbs. This is the do part. This is what we want students to do. And the what is what we want them to do with that action. For example, write what? An essay. We want them to analyze the issues. We want them to indicate what side they're on. We want them to support their position. And finally, the last verb in that prompt, we want them to provide reasons and examples. So here's how it looks with those verbs highlighted in red. And for students, something as simple as this do what chart can make a big difference, because then they can use it as kind of a checkbox, and they can go through and make sure that they've done everything we want them to do in that writing task. So here's another book. Again, it's been out for a while. It's not very expensive. You could probably get it used for $10, but Papers, Papers, Papers is Carol Jago's attempt to support other teachers of writing. It's her survival guide. She's been a teacher of writing for 40 years. She's the past president of the National Council Teachers of English. She's just a really consummate professional, and she's been trying to figure out how to teach writing well and how to handle the paper load for a long time. So I want to just share with you a few of her ideas that I tend to agree with. In this book, one of the quotes she says is the most successful comments or corrections were those referring specifically to criteria that teachers had taught in class. So for example, if you, as a writer yourself, you might have gotten comments from teachers that just didn't make much sense, like awkward, for example, in the margin. That might not make much sense to a student writer. But if you as a teacher have been teaching verbs, for example, and you're trying to help kids understand the difference between active verbs and passive verbs, and in your feedback on their writing, you're referring specifically to what you taught them about verbs and what you taught in class generally, that kind of feedback tends to help students a lot more than just general feedback that might be hard for them to understand what it means. And then this is another biggie that I definitely agree with. Carol Jago says, students generally resent extensive criticism and generally ignore more than a few well-placed, focused, and easily understood suggested changes in writing style or substance. So as teachers, we might see a student paper and we might have 50 things we'd like to mark. She says, you know what, just focus on the top 3. To focus on the ones that really matter the most, that you can give kids really specific guidance on how to improve. That's the kind of feedback that they're going to appreciate and be able to work with. She also has a few other tips. She says, do it now. You can't put it off forever. Sit down, get it done. She says, comment, don't correct. So what she means by that is add comments to the student writing, but don't correct everything for them, because that's not going to help a student writer become a better writer. So she asks a lot of questions in the margins. For example, she might ask questions like, could you expand on this and paint a more elaborate picture of this event you're describing? So she's asking questions that are guiding students in terms of what they need to do next, rather than criticizing or correcting what they've done. Set aside extended periods of time for grading. It does take time, there's no way around it. So I always like to share an example from a friend of mine who teaches writing at Orange High School. Every Thursday afternoon at 4 o'clock, everybody who knows her thinks that she has a standing meeting, and nobody interrupts her. They all think that she has a meeting every Thursday at 4 o'clock. She doesn't. What she's doing during that 4 o'clock hour every Thursday is reading student writing and giving feedback. So she's figured out a way to guarantee herself an hour a week with no interruptions. It's not enough time for her to finish the grading, but it helps her. It helps her keep up. Use a timer. Carol Jago used to, when she was beginning as an English teacher, she would set a timer for 6 or 7 minutes. And when the timer went off, she would move on to the next essay, even if she hadn't finished writing or reading that student's response. So it's a practical way to keep yourself moving, giving feedback, but not taking too much time on each individual essay. Some textbooks have computerized scoring. So she suggests, at least once, if your textbook offers that kind of an option, have students upload a paper to the textbook platform and see what kind of electronic feedback they'll get back. It's usually not very elaborate. It's more of a glorified spelling grammar check, but it can be helpful to get a different kind of feedback, and that kind of feedback takes no work from the teacher. She's a big believer in rubrics, as am I. Make sure that students read your comments. So if you spend 20 minutes giving feedback on an essay, you probably want the students to read that feedback and not just glance at the grade and toss the essay. So one way to do that is if you're encouraging students to revise their work, then you might ask them, as Carol Jago does, to write a brief letter along with the revised draft explaining to her what changes they've made based on the feedback that she gave them. That lets her know real quickly that the students have read her comments and they've used that feedback. And then save student papers. So it's great to have models to share with students. It's great to go through and use a rubric and use a save paper that might be really, really strong and help kids understand why it was such a strong paper and understand the rubric as a way to identify the strengths in that paper. Peer assessment and self-assessment. This is also part of her book, and she has this Will Rogers quote saying, "You can't teach what you don't know any more than you can come back from where you ain't been." Meaning kids can't give each other feedback oftentimes on all aspects of writing, but she says they can be helpful in certain areas. So struggling writers typically can't help each other very much with editorial feedback, but it can give really good feedback, especially when the response is oral rather than written. So if the kids are having a discussion about one another's papers, that can be really helpful. Because she says if a draft is not communicating clearly to a peer, then it's unlikely to be ready for a wider audience. So here are 4 simple questions that she suggests student writers use to help one another. And again, this would be more of a conversation between students, not necessarily writing out the responses to these questions. But does it make sense? Can you follow my argument? Where did you get lost? And what do you need to know or want to know that I haven't told you? Those 4 questions can really help guide students when we ask them to engage in peer assessment and give quality feedback to another writer. So as teachers, the time we invest in student writing, the most valuable time for students to receive our feedback is before they revise and they edit. So if we're going to take time to read student papers and give them feedback to help them learn and grow and develop, we need to do that earlier in the process and then give them an opportunity to use that feedback to make changes and to improve their work. So one way to do that, she describes minimal marking. What's the best thing about the draft? So maybe one sentence, what's the best thing about this draft? The biggest overall difficulty, one thing that she wants her student to work on. And then finally, how could it be improved? She might give them one concrete suggestion. Maybe it's a template from They Say, I Say on how to integrate a quote or how to introduce a quote, for example. That one specific piece of suggestion or of feedback will lead to an immediate improvement. So this might take her 4 or 5 minutes per writer, but it gives good quality feedback without taking forever. So what I want everybody here to do is think about, when you think about teaching writing and handling the paper load, whatever level you're teaching, however many students you have, think about what helps you as a teacher of writing to manage the paper load and also to teach writing well more globally. So think about, if you had all the things that work for you, which 3 do you think you'd really want to share with colleagues? We'll have a chance at the very end. If anybody has one that they really want to share, or even more than one, you can. But I want to share with you 3 of mine, 3 of the favorites that I have. So this is a simple one. It's very appropriate, probably K through university. I like the hamburger approach to giving feedback. So the way this works is, if you've never seen this example or analogy before, the top bun when you're giving feedback is you're providing you're mentioning something positive, opening with a positive in your feedback. The meat here in the middle is where you're providing constructive criticism on how to improve. So this is where you hit them with what they can do to improve, to become better writers. And then finally, the other bun at the bottom is where you end again with something else positive. So student reads your feedback, opening with something positive, some suggestions for how to improve, and then finally something else positive. This can really make a difference for students because they also need to know what they're doing well, as opposed to just hearing about what they're not doing well. So the hamburger approach gives them really two positives along with whatever needs to be worked on. Another one I like, if you have ever tried to teach students how to summarize, oftentimes it's a hard thing for kids to do. And when I was last working with seniors at the high school level, I had them read something and asked them to summarize it, and I was blown away by what I got back, because what I got back was anything but a summary. It was personal opinion. There were stories written. It wasn't summary at all. So I went back. It was humbling for me, and I realized I need to figure out how to teach summary. So this links you to a Google Doc version of this strategy, which I would encourage you to try with students. Quickly, I just want to share with you what it is, because it's pretty simple. So individually, you have kids, everybody's read something. And then individually, you have each person write down the list of the 5 most important words in the reading. So maybe give 5 minutes for this. So 5 minutes, everybody write down the 5 words individually that you think are most crucial to understanding that reading's main idea. The timer goes off, and then you say, okay, you've got your list of 5 words. Now find a partner. And now you and your partner have another 5 minutes to create a new list of the 5 most important words from the reading. So unless the 2 lists are identical, you're going to have to negotiate and argue and discuss which 5 words are going to come out of your partner team's work, your group of 2. So that is a really valuable experience for kids, to hear the 5 words from others and have to defend their words and maybe give up a word. There's a lot of learning that happens there. And then step 3 is your pair joins another pair, and now you have a group of 4. And each group of 4 has to then come up with another group or another list of 5 words. So that you've got 5 minutes now to come up with a list from both of the partner groups. You've got to leave this time, this step, with a list of 5 words that your group of 4 agrees are the most essential to understanding that reading. And then finally, you go back individually, and using the list of 5 words that came out of your group of 4 time, you have to write, it's usually a paragraph summary of the reading, and you have to underline the words that your group of 4 agreed were the most essential to that reading. I like this because it helps focus students on essential words, which become part of the summary. That makes the summary more text-based, and it tends to focus them more on the ideas in the reading. And there's a whole lot of talk and learning and discussion going on here that helps kids really come to understand the reading better. And finally, up here in that first level, a kid who comes up with 5 words individually, there's nothing to prohibit the student from using those words in his or her summary. You just have to use the 5 words that your group of 4 agreed to. But you can use any other words as well. So students like it, it's fun for them, and it really helps kids write effective summaries. And my final suggestion for how to give feedback remotely is kind of where we pause and end the presentation and talk a little bit. But what we have probably all found out over the last couple, 2-3 months is when we're working remotely, our feedback has to be personalized, and we have some really cool tools to do that. So the ones I'm going to share with you, most of these are free. This one is not free. It's Adobe Acrobat Pro DC. It's a pay version of Adobe Acrobat. So everybody has the free version of Adobe Reader that opens up PDF files. But if you're willing to spend a couple $100, or if your school, mine does, provides this to me for free, when you open a PDF document from a student, you have the ability, if you have this version of Adobe Acrobat Pro, you can insert comments just like you would in Google Docs or Microsoft Word, but you can also insert audio feedback. So you open up a paper and you click on a word, and you have the ability to insert written feedback or audio feedback. And the way I use this is I insert quick little audio files, and the student, when he or she opens up that paper, they see a little audio icon and they click on it and they hear me talking about their writing. It saves me a ton of time because I'm not a fast typist, and it personalizes my feedback so the students hear me talking to them as opposed to just reading what I've written. And all these others are ways to do that as well. So Flipgrid, you can create videos. Some teachers use Flipgrid to provide feedback on student essays. So you could open up an essay on your paper or your computer, for example, and be talking about it while you're capturing your screen, and then share that video with your student, and that student opens up the video and sees his or her paper and hears you talking about it and maybe pointing to different aspects of the paper as you go through it. Screencastify and Screencast-O-Matic are also free, and you can do the same thing. You can do a screen capture. Jing is the same thing. Loom is the same thing. Camtasia is not free, but there's a free trial. So Flipgrid free, Screencastify free, Screencast-O-Matic free, Jing is free, Loom is free. All of them allow you to do screen capture and create videos where you can talk through a student paper and share really, really quality feedback electronically. So this is a great, these are great resources for how to personalize our feedback. So I think I'm going to pause here and stop sharing for a minute, and then see if folks have any of their own favorite digital tools to share. And also bring us back to that a few slides ago I mentioned